Hi everybody, and welcome to our 7th Lead Strong episode. I'm delighted to be here today and joined by my co-host Stephanie Hopper and our two wonderful guests who will all introduce themselves shortly. Delighted to be running these as part of our Capfinity Lead Strong series. At Capfinity we have a 16-year track record in disrupting the world of assessment and development by deploying a strengths-based methodology. We have offices and a presence in the UK, the States, Australia, and Ireland, and I'm delighted to be working in this space. And Steph and I work on our leadership proposition called Altitude, where we're also being very disruptive and changing how leadership is done and kind of looked at and delivered across sectors and organisations. As I say, delighted to be here for this episode, which has a very interesting and exciting topic today, looking at the technology sector and leadership within tech. So I'll hand over to Steph to do intros. Hi, Steph. Welcome.
Thank you, Celine. Hi. Yes, so I'm Steph Hopper, Celine's co-host for Lead Strong, and I'm the Director of Development Solutions at Capfinity. Really delighted, actually, that we're focusing on a topic that I've thought about for many years, actually, and we've got two fantastic guests to share some of their thoughts around that topic. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So first of all, Dan, who's been a client of mine on and off for many years. Dan, would you tell us a little bit about your career in tech and also, I guess, why you're passionate about this topic?
Yeah, for sure. My career's been going for about 25 years now. I started out in the UK in a small startup, ended up moving out to California in '96, worked at Apple for 4 years, got to know Steve Jobs quite well there. Did a bunch of startups in California, including founding my own company called Blurb, which lets you publish your own books. Moved to New York, joined Google, built one of their first intelligent search engines. So that was an interesting project. And then really for the last sort of 15 years or so, I've been focused on growth stage startups. So leading engineering and product teams at a variety of interesting startups, including Songkick in London, which is where I met Steph, and now back in California. And I'm currently the SVP of engineering product and design for Mode, which is a data analytics startup that's growing fast, and enjoying all of the challenges of how do you grow a company and how do you make it, take something that's sort of a seed of success and turn it into something big and really big and successful. And I think leadership is just incredibly important. I think it's the core of a company's success. But what I think is really fascinating about leadership is that it is ultimately about enabling others to be successful. I actually don't do very much, except I help other people be successful, whether that's around building a great culture, building a great organization, hiring the right people, setting the strategy. And so for me, it's all about how do I enable my team and those around me to be successful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. And we should point out that Dan is in California, so he's got up early for us today, which we really appreciate.
Very grateful.
Very grateful for that. And everything you said rings true from having worked with you, Dan, and your sort of passion for making sure you were doing the right thing by your people. Let me come to Karen, one of our co-collaborators at Capfinity, who we are very fond of and has worked with a lot of leaders around the world. Karen, tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm an organizational psychologist by training, and about 18 years ago, I left my tiny island in Malta, moved here, and I was working at the BBC at the time. And about 15 years ago, I started working with leaders in terms of coaching or running workshops and really helping develop leaders and their teams. And I've been working with quite a few tech companies like Uber, Deliveroo, Just Eat, Google. And, I think, the tech industry is extremely fascinating, and being a leader in it especially, I think is so important. And I'm really passionate about working with leaders because I do think that every single action that a leader takes has ripple effects, and it really determines how people feel at work, how engaged they are, how much innovation there is, and ultimately, as Dan, you said, kind of the success of an organization.
Love that. Thank you. Thanks, Karen. I love the ripple effect. It's so true, you know, that every single thing that you do, the ramifications and the implications of that on an exponential basis. Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining. Really excited about the conversation. So just to give an intro to, you know, why this was even on our agenda and something we wanted to talk about today, as we all know, we're in the digital age. It's everywhere, and we know that efficiency comes from bringing together people and technology. It's something that's been on the agenda for organisations for quite a long time, and we also know that there are some really significant things kind of disrupting and deconstructing really the world, you know, as we know it. Dan, you'll be familiar with all of these, I'm sure, like social media, big data, AI, robotics, etc. You know, the list is endless. And so it was no surprise to me when I read some research that was published first by Forbes in 2019 that said that 87% of the CEOs that had been interviewed said that digital capability and digital mindset was of the most pressing concern for them in terms of the gap from a workforce and employee perspective. So we know it's a really important thing to be thinking about. At Capfinity, we're really passionate about technology and about data and about being digital. And a lot of our clients, all of my clients have been talking about it, looking at digital capability, incorporating that into leadership frameworks, and obviously tech clients that we have looking at what does leadership look like specifically. So that's why we wanted to create this space to talk about it. And I guess it does lead me on to the first question really, which is thinking specifically about leaders within technology companies. And I'm interested in what you both think of the specific demands that are placed on those leaders by virtue of working in a technology focused kind of organization as opposed to other sectors. So if I may come to Karen first. Karen, what's your take on that? What do you think of those specific demands?
So I think, first of all, when you work in a tech company, a lot of tech companies start off being quite small and explode due to their success. Yeah. So from my experience, I found that a lot of senior leaders, for example, are actually still quite young or maybe haven't had much experience in terms of building their leadership skills. So that's, I think, is one of the first challenges, is maybe not having had enough of that experience to really deal with some of the big challenges that are thrown their way. And then, that with it brings a lot of change. I think, change is constant in any organization, but especially in tech where, again, where this growth just leads to so much uncertainty. Things feel really in flux most of the time. And one of the things that creates sometimes is real disappointment, actually, when people join a tech company. So a lot of tech companies are really famous brands and really cool brands. So you join at a company expecting, this great brand that has everything sorted out and everything is working seamlessly. And then you go in and it's chaos because of the rapid growth and the change. And so one of the big things that they have to deal with is really fast churn. And in fact, that when a leader can learn how to really, manage expectations, but also truly welcome someone into the organization and make them feel comfortable despite the chaos, I think, they're doing much better than most.
It's really interesting. It's fascinating, isn't it? I guess this idea of employee value proposition is ever more powerful in tech companies because, as you say, the bigger tech companies have a brand of their own, and I guess it's how do you marry the reality of working within that organisation, which may indeed be different from what what you perceive and what you consume as a consumer, I guess, or as someone that works in that space. Okay, thanks, Karen. Really interesting. Dan, would you agree?
Oh yeah, very much. A lot of what Karen just said rings incredibly true. I think there's really sort of thinking about the difference between leadership in tech and elsewhere, I think there's a couple of things. So Karen's right that sort of hypergrowth scaling is, I think, very important. The other thing is, that pace of change that technology brings, and it's not just about the growth of the company, but it's about the nature of tech itself. Technology is constantly evolving, it's constantly innovating at a pace that you don't see in other industries, largely because there are no barriers. If you're in manufacturing, for example, you're building physical things, and there's only so much, the laws of physics constrain you. Technology isn't like that. It doesn't have any constraints. It's constrained only by human imagination, which, as we know, is a very powerful tool. And so this idea that tech is constantly evolving, constantly trying new ideas, constantly changing things, makes it a very exciting environment to work in. But it also brings challenges, and Karen mentioned several of those. It requires a flexibility of mindset. And it requires that you sort of lean into change. You can't be, it's not an environment for people who are change averse, who want steady, predictable lives. There's not absolutely, nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly valid choice. But that's not the way the tech industry works. The tech industry is posited on change is constant, rapid, and good. And that requires, I've seen people come in and be thrown out by that and just be unable to operate in those sorts of environments. And so that constant need to be figuring out the latest innovations, where do they fit into your company strategy, how do they change how your company works, that constant kind of influx of new ideas, new thinking, and that constant growth that technology enables. Because again, once you've found an idea that works, there's no cost to adding 1 million people or 100 million people to using it. It's essentially free to just add users of your product, which is just not true anywhere else. And so it leads to these very high churn, high growth, and high change environments, which is thrilling and exciting and sometimes a little scary.
It's interesting, isn't it? We within our leadership model, we've got a strength called change facilitation, which is all around, exactly as you said, Dan, leaning in to change and being an ambassador and a role model and a catalyst for change. I guess I'm pondering, listening to you both speak about the balance that leaders tend to have to strike between being ambassadors of change and being excited by change, but also being a source of stability and reassurance and comfort for followers and people within the organisation, because we know from the research that actually a leader is that greatest source of being an anchor. So do you see that within tech companies as well, that actually that is a way of supporting individuals with the degree of change if you have a very strong, stable presence as a leadership? You're nodding. Do you Karen or Dan? No, go on, Dan. You carry on.
I think that's right. When I talk about leadership, one of the key attributes of a great leader, I think, is calmness. The ability to, in the middle of the storm, be the person who says, let's just take a beat. Let's step back. Let's see what's going on, and let's actually take the emotion of the moment down and actually think through how we're going to problem solve right now. And so that's an important thing. One thing we talk about a lot is psychological safety. Are we providing an environment for the employees where they feel like they have real safety in which to do their work? And that can cover a wide range of different aspects. But I think it's incredibly important. And it is that balancing force, which is you acknowledge and say, look, we're going to go through constant change. We're constantly evolving. And my organization is stable for about 3 months at the maximum before I have to reorganize it, because we're constantly adding people, we're adding teams, we're adding projects, we're changing all the time. And that produces a lot of uncertainty and can be very disruptive for people. So yes, I absolutely need to balance that with, there are points of stability, and it's very important to be able to say, these are the things that are going to change, but these are the things that are going to stay the same. So that people can anchor on, here are the things that I know that I can rely on. There are bits of culture that we're going to hold steady, that we believe are so important that they're the anchor point for you. And these are the things that we're going to change. And that gives people the ability to say, okay, now I can think about that in a rational way, and I've got these points of safety that I can sort of operate from. So that's something we've found very successful.
Yeah, I love that, this idea of psychological safety, and for me it overlaps perhaps with some of the research around locus of control. And if you can say to someone, this is what you can control, then we know that is has a calming effect. Karen, you were nodding there.
I always love using the analogy of being on a plane when you hit turbulence. And I don't know about you, I'm a pretty nervous flyer, but the first thing I do is I look at the stewards and think, does their face look calm, or are they terrified? Because then I can tell if I'm going to crash and die or if I'm safe. And I think that a leader needs to be that face of calm, exactly as Dan said. And I love that this concept of psychological safety is coming up, because I do think that in a tech environment especially, we are going through an environment that's quite chaotic, that's going through rapid change, and it's always on, right? I don't think there's the normal 9-to-5 scenario here. I know when I've worked with people, especially who kind of work on apps that kind of people use at the weekend, there's no break for them. And I guess it's really important then that leaders create a space where people feel like they can speak up if they're struggling. One of the biggest struggles is burnout and just kind of overdoing it a little bit. And so allowing people to come to you as a leader and saying, hey, I'm struggling, especially in the context we are in right now, where we know so many people are being affected, especially mental health wise, with COVID and what's happening at the moment. So focusing on creating that sense of safety, I think, is at the core actually of what then creates a team that can perform even when there is turbulence.
Absolutely. Yeah, fascinating. I guess the other thing I wanted to ask you about, both of you, is kind of a bit broader, because we know that that digital mindset is essential for leaders in all organizations. I can't imagine technology isn't touching every industry in some shape or form. We had a webinar a few weeks ago with leaders from the NHS, and the Great Ormond Street CEO said, the biggest thing that surprised him was the way he could turn all his appointments virtual. Like, they'd been trying to do it for 5 years and they did it in 4 days. I mean, you've got to laugh, haven't you, really? But anyway, that's another story. But how can leaders, do you think, irrelevant of their sector, take on a more digital mindset? Dan, what are your thoughts there?
That's a good question. I mean, it is about embracing change. It is about how do you build a system within a company that is inherently able to change and adapt. So we talk a lot in the tech industry about agile with a capital A, which is a process, ironically, which came out of car manufacturing originally, but is now very sort of embedded into tech, where we have these very rapid cycles of innovation. Often, in the span of a couple of weeks, we will quickly build something, get it into user hands, get very rapid feedback, and can be continually incorporating that, so that you actually build change and innovation right into the heart of your process about how you actually even develop products. And I think that there's a really solid ground for other industries starting and other sectors starting to adopt those kinds of approaches. It's very focused on learning. It's very focused on understanding your users. It's very focused on rapid innovation, and the ability to do that. It's not something that is sort of only suitable for tech. I think any can adopt, again, I think you used the right word, mindset. It's that approach of, look, the world is changing. It's not going to slow down anytime soon. The organizations and the products that are able to adapt to that world are the ones that will be successful. So, how can we build into the very heart of everything we do this idea that learning, that change, that innovation are the lifeblood of your organization. They are what you are about. We often talk in the tech industry of we are a collection of innovators who are trying to solve problems, trying to learn and solve problems. And that's what we are. We're not software engineers. We're not, these various job categories. That's ultimately what we are. I think that approach can be incredibly fruitful, even outside of the tech industry.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. It's the sort of rapid learning and rapid decision-making cycles that Agile gives, well, anyone who employs it and use it, don't they, Dan? And as you said, I think part of that mindset of everyone being an innovator in their role is really so important. Karen, what are your thoughts on that digital mindset?
Well, first of all, the first thing that strikes me is that the minute we were forced to do it, we did it, right? So many companies before we would say, well, we can't work virtually, it won't work, it's impossible. And here we are, right? Even right now, 4 of us talking virtually. And I think going back to what Dan was saying about having an agile mindset, I do think it's so essential for leaders to think about the ways of working in an agile way as well. So I've noticed that as we're working virtually, we are experiencing new problems. So for example, people are finding it really hard to switch off because there's less of a boundary between home and work life. There's no ritual of closing your laptop, getting on the tube if you're in London and going home. That signifies, this is the end of the day. There's none of that. So a lot of people are ending up working much longer hours, for example, or else people are overwhelmed by meetings that just have been booked into their diary from one thing, from 1 hour to the next. And so it's so important that we take that agile mindset and we pause and we think, right, what's working right now? What's not working? I know, for example, I've seen companies now engineer coffee breaks, right, virtual, so that they can still maintain the connection that a lot of people miss. And when they've done that, what I've seen is that people actually feel more connected. So when there's been an investment in maintaining connections that don't have to do with work, right? It's just about people getting to know each other. I've seen other companies implementing meeting-free days so that people can actually get the work done rather than just having a whole day with one meeting after another. Meetings not being an hour long, being 50 minutes long, so that people have a chance to have a break between one thing and another. And I think these are all really good examples of someone pausing and saying, this isn't working well right now. What can we do about it? And actually, the fixes are really, really simple. The trick is to actually pause and say, how do we fix this? That's important.
It's the reflection, isn't it? And in a way, it reminds me of the agile process and the retrospective, how critical that is to the success of that cycle, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we run on a fairly standard 2-week cycle. So we have, a kickoff at the beginning, there's, 2 weeks of work, and then we have these retrospective meetings at the end, which are very much focused on, what went well and what can we do better in the 2 weeks. And I think 2 weeks is this really interesting magic number because it's just long enough to get real work done and actually produce something. But it's also short enough that you can remember. Like if I ask you to remember the details of what happened 6 weeks ago, it's hard. 2 weeks I can do. And then it's also, it forces you to see everything in these 2-week cycles. So in a retrospective, you're only allowed to suggest changes that can affect the next 2 weeks, that you can do in the next 2 weeks, which is a really interesting discipline because it means that it forces you to do these sort of small incremental changes, which over time add up into something really big and meaningful and, a really huge change. But because you're saying, don't tell me like how you're going to make everything perfect, just tell me how we're going to make things a little better in the next 2 weeks. It's very concrete and it's very actionable, and it breaks problems down. It forces you to break problems down into these small bite-sized pieces, which is right at the heart of the agile mindset. And so, I love retrospectives. I think a well-run retrospective is a beautiful thing. And I think they are absolutely the mechanism by which you are constantly incorporating learning and change into the very heart of the process itself.
Yeah. I love that. I think there's so much for us to learn, isn't there, in terms of how Dan, you're working in your organisations and with your teams. I think the really I guess two startling things for me are this piece around the kind of culture and making that kind of feedback okay, and like you say, safe. And then just operationalizing it. Yeah, love those. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, thank you for this really fascinating conversation. I think if I were to summarize our entire conversation, there are three things that have really stood out to me, and I know I'll be kind of musing over for the next kind of few days or weeks. The first, I think, the word that's come up a lot is change. And we know that change is everywhere. It's constant, it's happening all of the time at a breakneck speed. And we see that being particularly pertinent in technology companies. And we talked a lot around the best way to kind of not only deal with that, but really harness that. And Dan and Karen, you were giving examples from your experience in technology companies, but also, what you can see other people deploy in other sectors. And I think this notion of really making learning and feedback and kind of rapid innovations be at the heart of what you do, so that you are naturally agile every day, and really kind of operationalizing that's been really interesting for me to learn more about and to hear about how that happens in tech companies. And I guess the strongest takeaway, and this is my bias coming out as a psychologist, if it's got psychology in the title somewhere, I'm going to love it, but this concept of psychological safety, I think is really powerful. And when you're in an organization where there is a lot of ambiguity and change and volatility, actually the role of a leader in being an anchor for individuals and for people, and a source of stability and calmness. And Karen, you use this wonderful analogy of being in a plane when it's turbulent, and we all do it. You look to the air hosts and air hostesses. Are they flapping? No, it must be fine. And I think there's a role for leaders across organisations to do that. And I think we've seen that actually during the pandemic, right? That's kind of come to the fore as something. So as ever, I would have loved to have filled an hour or 2 hours talking about this. It's been really fascinating. I will just come to each of you for your final kind of parting thoughts or pearls of wisdom, really, as we reflect on the last half an hour. Karen, I'll come to you first.
So for me, especially since we're talking about change and kind of there's the challenges that come with it, my message to any leader is remember that you don't have to do it on your own, right? Yeah. That as a team, you can decide what changes or what stays the same, as Dan was talking about earlier. And so you don't need to come up with those answers yourself. And it's actually much more effective if, as a team, you discuss what those answers should be.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, but power in the team, power in the many, absolutely. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate this idea of being very explicit about what is stable and what is changing.
Yes,
because that's how you give people that sense of psychological safety, right? If you can really help people know where the points of stability are in the system, in the work environment, in the work you're doing, it helps them deal with the points of instability, and it helps them lean into being agents of change and actually being innovators. And so, I'm a huge believer in make things explicit, point at them and name them, because then that helps people think about them and reason about them and actually, incorporate them into their lives. So let's do that more.
Wonderful. I love that. Definitely taking that away with me. Thank you, Dan. And Steph, last but not least.
Yeah, and I guess just reflecting on what Dan and Karen have just shared, I think there's something about, I guess, the leaning into change and how we do that as leaders. And one of the things that I think often happens for leaders when we're going through a lot of change is we're perhaps given information ahead of our teams. And we're often ahead of them emotionally in terms of dealing with that change and accepting it. So I think, for me, never forget that you're probably ahead of them on whatever curve they're going through, positive or negative. And you need to give them time to digest the information you're sharing, because you're in a privileged position as a leader. And it's important to always remember that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. As I say, a really wonderful discussion. Steph and I are back again in 4 weeks, actually. Got a very, very slight hiatus in our schedule. We're back on the 11th of August, where we will be looking at the concept of potential versus performance. We know, what does potential mean? What does it look like? How is it different to performance? Another fascinating, different but fascinating topic. So we'll really look forward to seeing you then. Dan, Karen, huge gratitude for your joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your days. Dan, you've got more ahead of you than we have, being based out in Cali. So yeah, enjoy, and yeah, lovely to see you. See you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.